Hi, I'm Clarissa Moll, producer and moderator of the Bulletin. Here's a short clip from one of our segments in this week's episode. On Monday, President Trump instituted tariffs on steel and aluminum following extensive threats that he would impose them on Mexico, Canada, and China as well. Reciprocal tariffs are also on the horizon.
I'll be announcing probably Tuesday or Wednesday at a news conference reciprocal tariffs, and very simply, it's if they charge us, we charge them.
The Wall Street Journal reported that the end goal of Mr. Trump's sweeping economic actions thus far seems to be an economy with a smaller role for imports, immigrants, and the federal government, and a bigger one for private investment. But when it comes to the everyday American, many of us are wondering, what does a smaller role for imports actually mean to us? Is it bluster, or are there genuinely big challenges that are ahead? One source that I've turned to for wise counsel on matters of business over the years is the team at Eventide Funds, a value-based investment firm right here in Boston that has the tagline, "Investing that makes the world rejoice." Business and economics can feel like a heady discussion, and I always appreciate the clarity that Eventide brings to conversations like this. Joining Russell, Nicole, and me is Reginald Smith, research analyst for Eventide. Reginald, welcome to the Bulletin.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So Russell and Nicole and I are not economists. Can you give us an Econ 101? How do tariffs work, and why, as an ordinary American, should we care about them?
Absolutely. Yes, and I'll start just to keep our compliance team happy that nothing I say should be taken as investment advice. So it's great to be here again. And so tariffs, of course, they're making a lot of headlines in the news right now. And you can think of them simply as a duty or as a tax. So if we think of the world as a global market where people all over are producing goods, let's say you're a company and you want to buy shoes and sell them in the U.S. market. Then you go and let's say you buy shoes for $10 in Thailand, for example. This is a totally made-up example. And then you sell them in the U.S. at, say, $20. Well, when you go and buy them in Thailand, and let's say that there's a 25% tariff on shoes imported from Thailand, that $10 now becomes $12.50. So there's a $2.50 tax put on that good that is imported. Now, importantly, the importer is responsible to pay that tariff, and that tariff flows right into the Treasury. So when you go to sell that shoe, whereas you could have made a simple, let's say, profit of $10 because you bought it for $10, now you sell it at $20. Well, now if you continue to sell it at $20, you're going to only have $7.50 of profit, so you'll likely raise the price to $22.50 to keep your $10 of profit, and then consumers ultimately would pay. Now, that simple example, unfortunately, doesn't hold in real life all the time. It gets a bit complicated. For example, the company in Thailand that is producing the shoes, they might actually lower their price to alleviate some of the burden on the importer, on the company here, because they want to continue to have access to the market. And they know that maybe someone, let's say in India, is producing a shoe for $8. And if they are priced too high, their business could then shift to another country. So it gets complicated, but that's simply how to think about it. It's a tax on imports, the same way when we go to the store and pay a sales tax. It's essentially that on a global scale for goods that are imported into the United States.
So President Trump imposed tariffs back in 2018 as well. How are these that he is imposing now similar or different than what he did before?
Yeah, I think the biggest change has been some of the broader ideas around reciprocal tariffs, and maybe less so just targeted at China. I think in the first round, there was a lot of focus on China. There was some fluster with other countries, but China was perceived as sort of the country that we needed to address some type of trade situation. And I should say that generally tariffs are used for three different things. So one, they can be used to raise revenue. Some countries rely on tariffs to fill the government coffers to provide government services. Tariffs can also be used to protect local jobs. If, for example, other products overseas are being produced more cheaply, and you don't want those cheaper products to undercut existing production, some countries use them as a protective measure. And then simply they can be used as a negotiating tool to seek some other policy outcome. And so any of those sort of three things are on the table in any type of sort of tariff conversation. I would say in terms of what's changed over the last 8 years, because from a political perspective, much of the original tariffs were kept in place under the previous administration, and now we're seeing more ideas around reciprocal tariffs where if the U.S., for example, is under a tariff from another country, let's say India, for 10% on some good, we would impose, the United States government would impose the same tariff percent on the same good coming from India, for example. So it would sort of tit for tat any tariff constraints that the U.S. is under. The other thing that we're seeing is more of an escalation, so tariffs are sort of going higher from where they were previously. And you mentioned steel and aluminum, and so the idea there would be that it would be even harder for others to sort of import in particular sectors in a price competitive way compared to domestic production. Now, this is a sort of admittedly a longer conversation because, as you can imagine, there's tons of ripples through the economy that we as investors are tracking. And then, of course, I think one of the even more interesting questions is, what does this mean for us as Christians? But I'll stop with those thoughts.
Yeah, we'll get there. I definitely want to go there. Well, one of the things I think about, and I think that most Americans are thinking about is, when I go to the grocery store, when I need to buy my kid a new pair of shoes, is this going to touch me? And I know that global supply chain issues have been a problem since the pandemic. Back then it was, you'd go to the grocery store and there was a single roll of paper towels on the store shelf. How does the ordinary American experience those supply chain issues now? And are tariffs going to fix that problem, or are they only going to exacerbate it?
Yeah, so tariffs are disruptive, especially when they're first imposed. I think that is a reasonable assumption. Most economists would say that tariffs are inflationary, meaning they increase the cost of goods. And if I could go back to my shoe example, I think I would warn against thinking that a 25% tariff, for example, on shoes would increase the cost of shoes proportionately. What is likely to happen is some sort of sharing of the impact, meaning the producer, let's say in Thailand, would lower their price a little bit, and the U.S. reseller essentially would not raise the price to the full $22.50, but maybe set it at $21. So there would be some impact, but it wouldn't be the full impact of, let's say, 25%. The other thing that can happen is existing production. For example, if there's existing shoemakers here in the United States, they now are comparing their production costs to $12.50, which is what the Thailand production plus the tariff is. So their profits can actually go up. And the idea is they could then hire more people because they would become a more preferred supplier. And so their production could potentially grow. And so you have to sort of look at this industry by industry to see if that is possible. But what it does mean is that prices generally go up, right? Because the selling price of that good is now at a higher floor, if you will. And then supply chains take time to adjust. They're for every industry it'll be different, but rarely do we see you can just sort of flip a switch. Companies will have to develop teams to find other areas of the world or areas of the country where they can source products that aren't tariffed, that have lower tariffs. So there's a scramble. It's a scramble, if you will, to figure out how to avoid tariffs for some companies.
So this is really helpful for me to understand, because a lot of the fear, I think, is that taxes on goods will just all immediately show up on my receipt at the grocery store and on my receipt when I go to Kohl's or Dick's Sporting Goods. This is certainly a relief for my sons who were concerned about their Nike shoes that were coming from manufacturers in China. And Russell and Nicole, I wonder, when prices rise, Christian organizations and nonprofits, churches, they feel them. Have you, in your conversations with ministry leaders, sensed anything, any kind of concerns about the ways that prices have risen over the last few years as they think about their bottom line?
I mean, for me, yes, I've seen it, but I have to kind of specify the location. In this DC, Maryland, Virginia area, everyone is on heightened awareness. There are churches where, 60% of their attendees are in some way connected with the federal or state government where they live. So there's a heightened awareness, there's a heightened sensitivity. What we're seeing in general in conversations with other pastors, there's a donor hesitancy that's at work. It's not that people don't have it now, it's that they're worried that they might not. So that general concern affects, well, should I give to the building campaign what I would have given a year ago or 2 years ago? Or should I hold back just in case? And sometimes it is, on the flimsier level, like, is it Nike shoes? I had somebody say to me the other day, you better buy all of your electronics now because soon it's going to be too expensive to have your Samsung TV. So I think there's a little bit of that. But nonprofits exist on the goodwill and generosity of the people. And the question is, will Christians still see that biblical obligation to give as unto the Lord, even when their finances are tight? And I think we'd have to look through history to see sometimes some churches are recession proof. Some churches really do have just such a discipline that they will give even their last dime. They'll do the widow's mite, to ensure the success of the ministry. But not all churches are like that. And I do think whether it has a direct impact or an indirect impact, at some point we are going to have to start thinking about how do we return to spiritual discipline, as giving as a way of discipline, as opposed to giving as a way of, well, if you have it today, give it, and if you don't.
And part of that has to do with the complexity of the world economy now in a way that simply would not have been the case in previous eras of global Christian history. So that there are, for instance, churches that have investment portfolios, they have retirement accounts invested, they have all of these things, and don't exactly know how which piece of this oceanic sort of system is going to affect everything else. And so there's a kind of uncertainty, and with that can often come a kind of hesitancy, as Nicole said, not just from the people who are giving, but from the people who are carrying out the mission to say, can we do this now, or will we be sorry later? It's just a great deal of for a lot of ministry readers, what almost seems like tarot card reading to them, and that's. That is a reality, whether we like it or not.
Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.